"Only the dead have seen the end of war." This infamous quote, popular among US soldiers, captures perfectly the unrelenting cycle of conflict that plagues humanity, and that certainly plagues 2024. As the year unfolds, the world bears witness to dozens of ruthless wars, each a testament to the unending struggle for power, freedom, and survival, and a reminder that peace is but a fleeting illusion. You no doubt know about the two heavily publicized conflicts raging in 2024, the Russo-Ukrainian War and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the truth is that Ukraine and Palestine are just 2 out of 50 global territories plagued by war or senseless violence, according to the ACLED Conflict Index. This project assesses every country and territory based on 4 indicators: deadliness, danger to civilians, geographic diffusion, and armed group fragmentation. It then uses the data to rank the affected territories by the severity and impact of their conflicts. This mapping of the global landscape of conflict also helps shed light on lesser-known yet equally devastating wars that often escape headlines. According to the ACLED Conflict Index, there's been a 22% increase in political violence recorded in the last 5 years. In 2023 alone, most of the countries covered by ACLED, 168 out of 234, saw at least one significant incident of violence. In total, over 147,000 conflict events were recorded that year, resulting in at least 167,800 fatalities. Unfortunately, there have been quite a few bloody battles in 2024 as well. The ACLED reports that 1 out of every 6 humans on the planet has been exposed to armed conflicts in one form or another since the beginning of 2024. These horrifying figures beg the question, why don't we know more about these bloody conflicts? The harsh truth is that only the incidents that directly impact geopolitical interests and have resonance beyond the borders of the country in conflict will garner widespread media attention. Take the conflicts in Palestine and Ukraine as examples. The outcome of both of these conflicts has major implications for their respective regions, as well as global alliances, security, and international law. As such, they receive continuous coverage and analysis from media outlets around the world. In contrast, conflicts in less strategically significant regions often struggle to attract sustained attention, despite their sheer brutality and profound humanitarian impact. But that's what this video is for. It will shed light on all ongoing conflicts that would otherwise go unnoticed or underreported. But unfortunately, even this video won't be able to give each conflict the deep dive it deserves. There are simply too many wars going on and too little time. So for starters, we'll do a quick overview of all the armed conflicts currently taking place around the world before exploring many of them in more detail. The Middle East and North Africa undoubtedly have it the worst. According to Our Rule of Law in Armed Conflict Online portal, these regions are currently affected by over 45 individual armed conflicts raging in the following territories: Cyprus, Egypt, Iraq, Israel, Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Yemen, and Western Sahara. Most of these are non-international conflicts, meaning they involve armed groups within a single country rather than conflicts between states. Once you look at the rest of Africa, it doesn't get much better, with more than 35 non-international armed conflicts taking place all over the continent, including the territories of Burkina Faso, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, Senegal, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. Asia is the setting for 19 non-international armed conflicts involving 5 separate countries: Afghanistan, India, Myanmar, Pakistan, and the Philippines. As for Europe, you already know that the continent is the theater of the Russo-Ukrainian War, the first full-scale war on the continent since World War II. However, you might not know about 3 major military occupations also taking place in Europe, involving Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova. While Latin America's armed conflicts are non-international, 6 of them to be precise, they are intense enough to put the 2 affected countries, Mexico and Colombia, among the top 10 countries with extreme conflicts, according to the ACLED Conflict Index. Now that you have a better idea of the sheer scale of international conflicts in 2024, let's have a closer look at the worst among them. Though ranking countries by violence is a truly grim task, as every war-torn land bears the heavy burden of suffering and devastation, we'll rely on the ACLED Conflict Index ranking when listing the ongoing wars in 2024. According to the index, 10 territories in the world are characterized by extreme violence. 4 of them are in Latin America: Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and Haiti. 3 are in the Middle East: Palestine, Yemen, and Syria. 2 in Africa, Nigeria and Sudan, and 1 in Asia, Myanmar. Although Myanmar is the only country in Asia affected by extreme violence, it also tops the ACLED Conflict Index ranking, which is why it will be our first stop. Myanmar is currently being torn apart by a horrific civil war, also called the Burmese Spring Revolution or People's Defensive War. While plagued by insurgency since 1948, the ongoing civil war in Myanmar officially started on May 5, 2021. What triggered this brutal war was the February 1st coup d'etat in which the Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military, forcefully deposed the democratically elected government led by President Win Myint and State Chancellor Aung San Suu Kyi. Initially, the disgruntled people of Myanmar took to the streets to protest this shocking coup. However, as the military regime responded with force, the protesters realized that chants, signs, and symbolic acts weren't enough. So many of them took up arms and braced for a fight that would redefine their struggle for freedom and democracy. On May 5th, the National Unity Government, the newly formed coalition opposing the military junta, announced the formation of its armed wing, the People's Defense Force, or PDF for short. However, the PDF isn't the only faction fighting for democracy in this conflict. The war is actually fought by dozens of armed resistance groups and hundreds of militias across Myanmar, each battling for a shared goal: to overthrow the oppressive regime and restore democratic governance. Due to the sheer number of factions involved in the Myanmar civil war, the ACLED Conflict Index also ranks this country as the most fragmented in the world. However, in October 2023, several rebel factions united against the military junta in order to launch an ongoing military offensive known as Operation 1027. During Operation 1027, the rebels managed to seize 36 towns and 36 strategic outposts, scoring victory after victory. However, the intensity of this conflict is what catapulted Myanmar to the top of the ACLED Conflict Index rating. So far, Operation 1027 displaced 335,000 people and claimed the lives of thousands. Unfortunately, these figures are just a fraction of the total devastation caused by the Myanmar civil war. Since the 2021 coup in Myanmar, over 2.7 million people have been internally displaced, with another 113,000 fleeing Myanmar altogether. Over 53,000 lost their lives in the conflict, with almost 5,000 of them being civilians. The devastation spread onto properties as well, with almost 84,000 of them being burned or destroyed since the coup. But believe it or not, these figures can't come close to the ones caused by the second entry on our list, the Syrian civil war. Though to be fair, this civil war has been going on for much longer, since 15th of March 2011, to be precise. This war is a multi-sided, overlapping conflict involving various state-sponsored and non-state actors. This dispersed nature of the conflict is precisely why the ACLED Conflict Index ranks Syria as the second most conflicted country in the world. But how did these conflicts even start? Similarly to Myanmar, they started with large-scale protests against an authoritarian regime, this one led by President Bashar al-Assad. These pro-democracy rallies across Syria were part of the wider wave of Arab Spring protests in the region. However, these protests also turned bloody relatively quickly, forcing the rebels to take up arms. By mid-2012, this insurgency would escalate into a full-blown civil war. On the one side of this war, you had the Syrian government backed by Russia and Iran. On the other, there were anti-government rebel groups backed by the US and its allies, such as France, Italy, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. However, the conflict between the Syrian government and its opposition forces combined to form just one of the driving elements of the conflict in the country. The other two have been coalition efforts to defeat the self-proclaimed Islamic State and the conflict between Syrian Kurds and Turkish forces. As you can imagine, these overlapping conflicts resulted in some devastating consequences. Almost 7.2 million Syrians have been internally displaced by the civil war, while another 5.4 million live as refugees abroad. Over 600,000 people have been killed during the war, with 1/3 to a half of them being civilians. Owing to the Syrian civil war, 7 out of 10 Syrians now require humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian crisis in the next territory on the ACLED Conflict Index list, Palestine, is also dire, and that's an understatement. Of course, this horrific crisis stems from the next ongoing conflict we'll discuss, the Israel-Hamas war. Since this is one of the 2 ongoing wars the world is acutely aware of, we won't go into too much detail. As its name suggests, this war is fought between the State of Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian militant groups, primarily in the Gaza Strip, a small, densely populated territory in Palestine. Since the conflict affects virtually all Palestinian territories, the ACLED Conflict Index labels it as the most diffuse war in the world. Now, the conflict between Israel and Palestine is nothing new. It's been going on for decades. However, the current Israel-Hamas war, the deadliest of all the conflicts, started on October 7, 2023, following a shocking surprise assault by Hamas on southern Israel. During the attack, an estimated 3,000 militants breached the Gaza-Israel barrier and started attacking Israeli civilian communities and military bases, slaughtering 1,139 people. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF for short, responded some 3 weeks later, after first clearing the militants from its territory, by launching one of the most devastating bombing campaigns in modern history, followed by a large-scale ground invasion of Gaza. The initial 3-month-long aerial campaign involved over 3,000 airstrike events in 85 locations across Gaza, a stretch of land occupying 141 square miles. This unprecedented campaign claimed the lives of as many as 23,000 Gazans. By May 2024, this number grew to almost 40,000, mostly civilians. Civilians are also the primary victims of the next war we'll discuss, Mexico and its war on drugs. Naturally, this war significantly differs from the others on the list, as it's an asymmetric conflict fought between the Mexican government and various drug cartels. This conflict has become so brutal and widespread that many Mexican citizens believe they're living in the midst of a civil war, which few officials want to acknowledge. The severity of this war is the reason why the ACLED Conflict Index ranks Mexico as the 4th most violent country in the world, as well as the number 1 most dangerous country for its citizens, who are regularly directly targeted by cartels. These citizens are kidnapped, extorted, or killed for standing in the way of cartel operations, or even just being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Since 2006, the year the Mexican government officially declared war on criminal organizations, over 400,000 people have been killed, and more than 100,000 of them are still missing. But what sets many of these killings apart is their sheer brutality. Cartels are known to carry out mass executions, behead people, dump their bodies in the streets, or hang them from bridges. Worst of all, there seemingly isn't an end in sight for all this violence. As of 2024, over 70 armed cartels are vying for control of lucrative illicit economies in Mexico, and they will likely only get more vicious to achieve their goals. The Mexican state forces, though, aren't giving up either. In 2023, there was a 24% increase in armed interactions between them and opposing criminal groups, compared to the 705 events recorded in 2022. However, these conflicts still contribute to the cycle of violence, exacerbating the daily horrors faced by Mexican citizens. Unfortunately, the citizens of the next country on the ACLED Conflict Index list, plagued by an ongoing war, have experienced similar violence in the last 4 years. The country in question is number 7, Haiti, and the reason it makes our list is its ongoing gang war. Although Haiti has had a rather turbulent history, filled with instability, violence, coups, dictatorial regimes, and foreign interventions, the gang war officially started on May 24, 2020, following a series of civilian attacks by a coalition of gangs. Since then, the Haitian security forces have struggled to maintain control, with their ill-equipped national police quickly deteriorating due to personnel loss and corruption. Seeing the Haitian government as useless, some citizens have even taken matters into their own hands, launching the Bois-Carré vigilante movement, which took out 264 suspected gang members in the first 3 months of the operation, burning some of them alive. Of course, vigilante killings are still killings and only further fuel the already escalating violence. The violence has so far caused over 2,500 deaths or injuries and internally displaced more than 360,000 people. The number of people displaced within Haiti is almost equal to the number of people killed in the next conflict on our list, the Yemen Civil War. This brutal war has been ongoing since 2014, with multiple actors involved. There's the internationally recognized Republic of Yemen, led by the Presidential Leadership Council and backed by a Saudi-led coalition. Then there's the Iran-backed Houthi movement, with the Supreme Political Council as its executive body. And finally, there's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a Sunni Islamist insurgent extremist group. The Houthis became internationally known when they started attacking shipping vessels affiliated with Israel that passed through the Red Sea, which severely disrupted this major trade route, responsible for 30% of container trade and 12% of global oil transit. As a response, the US, the UK, and their allies conducted a series of airstrikes against the Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen in January 2024. Since then, there have been over 460 airstrikes on dozens of locations across Yemen, and they still continue to this day. After this refresher on how the Houthis became known globally, let's get back to the beginning. How did the Yemen civil war start? Well, it started with the Houthis as well. Ever since the Houthi movement, officially known as Ansar Allah, first arose in the 1990s, they have opposed the Yemeni government and even led some low-level insurgencies in the past. However, the ongoing conflict officially ignited by the Battle of Sana'a in September 2011, when the Houthis marched from their stronghold in the north and seized Yemen's capital, Sana'a. By early 2015, they had forced then-President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi to flee Yemen and seek refuge in Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia actually got involved in the conflict, launching a military intervention with the goal of restoring Hadi's government. Though they succeeded briefly, the Hadi government was eventually dissolved in April 2022. With incessant fighting between the government and the rebels, indiscriminate bombings by the Saudi-led coalition, and al-Qaeda's involvement, it shouldn't be surprising that the Yemeni civil war is drenched in blood. The Saudi airstrikes alone have killed or injured over 20,000 civilians since they began in March 2015. Overall, the war in Yemen has cost over 370,000 people their lives, both directly and indirectly. Directly through fighting, which claimed some 150,000 lives. Indirectly, as a result of food insecurity and lack of accessible health services. Although a ceasefire was brokered in April 2022, Yemen is still experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, with 2/3 of its population, around 21.6 million people, in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Some 1,200 miles away from Yemen, another country has also been torn apart by a brutal civil war: Sudan. As with many of the civil wars we've discussed in this video, there has been a long and tumultuous history between the factions that ended up as combatants. However, the conflict itself started in April 2023, when tensions between the Sudanese Armed Forces (SAF) and the official military forces of the Republic of Sudan and the Rapid Support Forces (RSF), a paramilitary group formerly operated by the government of Sudan, boiled over. RSF started attacking a series of governmental sites, including the principal airport in Khartoum, the capital city. Since then, fighting has been chiefly concentrated in major urban centers, with Khartoum seeing some intense clashes. The conflict has also drawn in various rebel groups, ethnic militias, and regional actors, further complicating the situation and causing concern that the war might spill over into South Sudan, which gained its independence in 2011. But even with all these concerns, international efforts to stop the war have been lackluster at best, which means that this bloody conflict is unlikely to end soon. This indefinite continuation of the conflict is sure to have catastrophic consequences for the civilian population, which has already suffered greatly in the one short year of the war. Over 7.7 million civilians have been internally displaced in a little over a year, with another 2.2 million fleeing the country altogether to neighboring Chad, South Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia. That's 20% of the total population of Sudan displaced in some 15 months. There have also been at least 15,000 fatalities, with some estimates putting the human toll at least 10 times more. The widespread atrocities and food shortages have only exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, leaving nearly 25 million people, over half of them children, in desperate need of relief. After Sudan, a country struck by a merciless civil war, we moved to Ukraine, a country torn apart by a ruthless Russian invasion. As we've already explained, we won't spend too much time rehashing this widely known war, as this video primarily aims to highlight the lesser-known conflicts of the world. But just because the Russo-Ukraine war is well known, doesn't mean we should overlook its profound and far-reaching consequences, as well as the unprecedented destruction and suffering it brought upon Ukraine. Since Russia first invaded Ukraine in February 2022, 3.7 million people have been driven away from their homes and internally displaced, while 6.5 million have sought refuge in neighboring countries like Poland, which has welcomed over 60% of all Ukrainian refugees. Almost 40% of the Ukrainian population, some 14.6 million people, are also in desperate need of humanitarian assistance in 2024. In 2 years of the invasion, there have also been at least 10,000 civilian deaths, with another 20,000 people injured. That's not to mention all the war crimes committed in the country, which have led to Russian President Vladimir Putin to be labeled as modern-day Hitler. With the ongoing wars taking place in the most violent countries out of the way, let's continue working our way down the ACLED list to mention the remaining lesser-known wars of 2024. Next on the ACLED Conflict Index ranking, you'll find the second largest country in Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DR Congo for short. The reason why this country is marked as having a high level of violence in 2024 is the ongoing conflict between the national military and insurgents in the eastern part of the country. The insurgents chiefly consist of M23, a rebel group with ties to the Rwandan and Ugandan governments, and the Allied Democratic Forces, an ISIS-affiliated militia group. This conflict began following fraudulent national elections in December 2023 and dramatically intensified in February 2024. Following this surge in violence, the United Nations reported that the number of internally displaced people in DR Congo reached 7.2 million in March 2024, making it one of the highest displacements in the world. The conflict, which has been going on since 1996, also claimed the lives of a staggering 6 million people. Although the country is currently experiencing a humanitarian truce, the war shows no signs of abating. Even worse, there are justifiable fears that the violence will only escalate further and the conflict will spread regionally. Elsewhere on the African continent, some 2,300 miles away from DR Congo, another civil war is raging on, this time in Mali. The so-called Mali War started in January 2012, when several insurgent groups began fighting a campaign against the Malian government, aiming to win independence or at least greater autonomy for northern Mali. Though this civil war experienced stretches of relative peace, the situation deteriorated in 2023 following the expulsion of UN peacekeepers from the country. These peacekeepers were part of the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, which turned out to be the deadliest peacekeeping mission for the UN, with at least 175 deaths listed as malicious acts. Just 400 miles away on the same continent, Burkina Faso has been going through a similar civil conflict. The combatants in this war are the government of Burkina Faso and Islamist rebels, mostly from Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The civil conflict began in August 2015 and has since led to the displacement of more than 2 million people and the deaths of at least 10,000 more. The wars in Mali and Burkina Faso are often interpreted as theaters of the insurgency in the Sahel, a violent Islamist rebellion plaguing the Sahel region of West Africa since the 2011 Arab Spring. Besides Mali and Burkina Faso, this insurgency has also intensified violence in Niger. This leaves us with just 2 more African nations characterized as countries with high violence levels by the ACLED Conflict Index: Ethiopia and Cameroon. Ethiopia is currently experiencing a devastating humanitarian crisis resulting from the Tigray War, an armed conflict that lasted for 2 years, from November 2, 2020 to November 3, 2022, and claimed 600,000 documented casualties. But while this conflict officially ended in 2022 with a peace agreement, violence and human rights abuses continue to plague the country, making recovery a distant dream for many. The situation is further complicated by ethnic tensions and ongoing clashes involving militia groups from the regions of Amhara and Oromia, exacerbating the overall instability. This new war in Ethiopia, named the War in Amhara, began in April 2023 after the Ethiopian military raided the Amhara region to disarm the Amhara Special Forces. Although this war has only been going on for a little over a year, it's already been marked by horrifying civilian suffering, including mass executions of citizens accused of supporting the rebels. As for Cameroon, the country has been dealing with a civil war since September 9, 2017. This war is also known as the Anglophone crisis, since it refers to a conflict between the country's English-speaking minority in the northwest and the French-speaking majority in the southwest. The roots of the crisis lie in the historical grievances and marginalization felt by the Anglophone population, who have long accused the central government of neglecting their region and imposing French cultural and administrative dominance. These tensions erupted into a full-scale conflict when separatist groups began demanding independence for the so-called State of Ambazonia, proclaimed by Anglophone separatists who are seeking independence from Cameroon. The Anglophone crisis has led to the deaths of at least 6,000 civilians and the internal displacement of 700,000 people. Back to South America, another ongoing conflict with a high level of violence is taking place in Venezuela. The crisis began during the presidency of Hugo Chavez in the 2000s and worsened during the presidency of his successor, Nicolas Maduro, in the 2010s. Amid the humanitarian crisis caused by ensuing hyperinflation, escalating starvation, disease, and crime, at least 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country since 2015 alone. Meanwhile, 6 million of them have resettled in other Latin American countries, with Colombia welcoming almost 2.5 million Venezuelans. While discussing the humanitarian crisis caused by chronic violence, insecurity, and extreme poverty, we must mention the so-called Northern Triangle region of Central America, consisting of 3 countries: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. El Salvador is the only country of the 3 not listed among the top 30 most conflicted countries in the world by the ACLED Conflict Index, owing to the heavy-handed crackdown on gangs by President Nayib Bukele. Honduras and Guatemala, on the other hand, are still battling gang violence, high crime rates, and severe poverty, which have afflicted them for decades. Finally, the last ongoing war we'll discuss in our video isn't listed among the top 50 most violent countries in the world, according to the ACLED Conflict Index. However, this conflict undoubtedly warrants a mention, given its regional impact and ongoing humanitarian consequences. The conflict in question is taking place in Azerbaijan and is arguably one of the better-known conflicts in the world, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. This conflict has been officially going on for over 36 years, ever since the 1988 resolution passed by Nagorno-Karabakh's regional legislator, declaring the region's intention to join the Republic of Armenia despite being located within Azerbaijan. The problem lies in the fact that the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast was established within the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic in 1923, despite being populated by 95% of the ethnically Armenian population. For decades, Russia has acted as a mediator between the two parties, but with Russia's attention now fully focused on Ukraine, the region has seen a surge in conflict once more. On September 19, 2023, Azerbaijan launched a large-scale offensive, occupying the Nagorno-Karabakh region. This offensive resulted in the official dissolution of the ethnic Armenian enclave on January 1, 2024, which sent over 100,000 citizens, almost all of the region's population, fleeing to Armenia in the matter of a single week. Azerbaijan now plans to reintegrate this region into Azerbaijan, and Armenia, threatened by neighboring Turkey and abandoned by its international allies, can only stand on the sidelines and watch it happen, for now at least. And there you have it, almost every ongoing war and conflict in 2024 exposed. Of course, almost is the key word here, as listing every single conflict would require far more time than we have. And as things are currently going, there may be new developments by the time this video is published. If you were tasked to update this video, which conflict would you add? Perhaps the conflict with Al-Shabaab in Somalia, or the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Also, do you see another war emerging in the near future, maybe in Taiwan, Cyprus, or Iran? And finally, which of the ongoing wars shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments section below, and thank you for watching the video.